Today, we're tackling one of the biggest, most world-changing events of the 20th century, the Russian Revolution. We're talking about how a massive empire, centuries old, just crumbles and gets replaced by this radical new state that honestly shaped the rest of history. So yeah, let's get right into it. So you've got to ask yourself this question, right? The Romanov dynasty. These guys ruled Russia for more than 300 years. So how on earth does all that power, all that history just, poof, vanish, seemingly overnight? To get the answer, we kind of have to start at the end. So yeah, we're jumping right in at the moment it all falls apart. It's the winter of 1917. And all this pressure that's been building up in Russia for decades, well, it's about to hit its breaking point and just completely sweep away an entire dynasty. And just like that, it was over. I mean, after huge protests all over the country, people were furious about the losses in World War I. They were starving from food shortages. The army and the politicians, they all just turned on the Tsar. Nicholas II, he had no cards left to play. He had to give up the throne. But really, this ending, it was a long, long time coming. Okay, so to really get why the Tsar fell, we've got to rewind a bit. We need to look at these powerful ideas and the really deep problems that were just churning away in Russia and all across Europe at the time. After the French Revolution, Europe became this total battleground of ideas. You had your liberals who were like, yeah, democracy, but, only for people who own property. Then you had the radicals, who were way more extreme, saying, nope, everyone gets to vote. And of course, you still had the conservatives just trying to hang on to the old ways, kings, the church, the drill. It was a real tug-of-war. And then this new, totally explosive idea enters the ring: socialism. And it offered a completely different way of looking at things. Socialists basically said, hey, the root of all this inequality? It's private property. Their solution was pretty radical. Get rid of it. Or at least control it, so we can build a society where everybody is actually equal. Now, the guy who really put this idea on the map, Karl Marx, he took it even further. He wasn't just talking about reform. He believed that the working class, the people in the factories, were destined to rise up and violently overthrow the whole capitalist system. This quote here says it all. It wasn't just a theory, it was a call to action, a call to arms. And in Russia, man, that call found some seriously fertile ground. Just think about what life was like. The Tsar had absolute power. There was no freedom of speech, no free press. Most people were peasants with no land. And the workers pouring into the cities were getting crushed with terrible pay and insane hours. So for them, an idea like Marxism, that wasn't just some abstract theory. It sounded like hope. It sounded like liberation. So the first really big eruption of all this anger, it happened way before 1917. The revolution in 1905 wasn't the main event, but you can think of it like a dress rehearsal. It was a huge, flashing warning sign of what was just around the corner. It all kicked off with Bloody Sunday. A totally peaceful crowd of workers marches to the Tsar's palace, and his soldiers just open fire on them. It was a massacre. And it completely shattered this idea that the Tsar was their protector. After that, protests and strikes exploded across the whole empire. The Tsar eventually caved and allowed a parliament, the Duma. But it was pretty much for show. He kept all the real power, and all the problems that caused the uprising, they were still there, just bubbling under the surface. And all those bubbling problems, they finally explode in 1917. The Tsar is gone, and Russia is just plunged into chaos. Into this massive power vacuum steps this small, pretty radical party, and they seize their moment with a promise that was simple, direct, and incredibly powerful. Now, this part is super important to get straight. There were actually two revolutions in 1917. First, in February, the revolution gets rid of the Tsar and sets up this temporary government. But that government makes a huge mistake. It keeps Russia in World War I. And that mistake was the opening that Vladimir Lenin and his Bolshevik party needed. They staged a second takeover in October.
So how did the Bolsheviks, this pretty small group, win so much support so fast? Well, they had a slogan that was pure genius in its simplicity: peace, bread, and land. Think about it. To the soldiers who were so sick of dying in the war, they promised peace. To the starving workers in the cities, they promised bread. And to the millions and millions of peasants, they promised land. It was a perfect message hitting on exactly what everyone desperately wanted.
But, grabbing power is one thing. Actually trying to build a new kind of country, the world's very first socialist state, that's a whole different challenge. The fight for Russia's future, it was far from over. In a lot of ways, it was just getting started.
So after they took power, the Bolsheviks went all in. They nationalized all the factories, all the land, and this move just lit the fuse on a brutal, bloody civil war. On one side, you had the Reds, that's the Bolsheviks and their supporters, fighting to keep their revolution alive. And on the other, you had the Whites, which was basically just a messy coalition of everybody else who hated them, from people who wanted the Tsar back to the liberals they'd overthrown. It was a devastating war that lasted for years. But in the end, the Bolsheviks, the Reds, they came out on top. And in 1922, they made it official. They declared the creation of a brand new nation, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, the USSR. And just like that, the world was a fundamentally different place. You really can't overstate the impact of all this. It wasn't just about ending the monarchy in Russia. It created the first ever state built on the ideas of socialism. And that sent shockwaves, massive shockwaves, all around the world. It inspired communist parties, movements for workers' rights, and struggles for equality in practically every country on the planet. And that leaves us with this one last, really big question. The whole revolution was fueled by this promise, right? The promise of a paradise for workers, a truly equal society. But how did that promise actually play out in the Soviet Union and around the world? Its echo, both the incredible hope it gave people and, let's be honest, the terror it sometimes became, that's a story that would define the rest of the 20th century.